Hello everyone, and welcome to another random video on the internet. Today we are covering a topic that I am surprised I have not already. What if Deku from My Hero Academia was in One Punch Man? Specifically, we want to discuss how far he would get power-wise against the various ferocious monsters the series has to offer, as well as go over how he might adapt to this new world, as well as the impact he might have on it, how well he can adapt to the other heroes, and so on. And yes, I did say we. I am not alone today. With me, I have a special guest, Phineas Flash. Say hello.
Hey, howdy, and hello there. I'm Phineas Flash, and I was the one who commissioned this idea. I am a humongous fan of both My Hero Academia and One Punch Man, and I am so excited to finally get into this. And if you really enjoy this video and this idea, and you want to see it explored in greater detail, you can check out my own series that I've been writing and posting on fanfiction.net. It's called My Hero Association, a story about Deku and his classmates all getting isekai'd into the One Punch Man universe. I have been pouring my heart and soul into this project for over a year now, and the story is still ongoing. Links in the description below. Don't forget to leave a review. Okay, shameless plug is over. Let's get going.
Happy to have you on, and thank you so much for commissioning this video. Honestly, I am not sure how it took me this long to do this topic, because I'll be honest, Izuku is one of my favorite anime protagonists of all time, don't at me. So thank you for providing this topic. But regardless, let's jump straight into it. When it comes to the power scaling of both series, I've covered One Punch Man pretty extensively over the years. Generally speaking, characters like early series Genos have various town level feats pretty consistently, and later on high-tier cadres like Goketsu, Homeless Emperor, and Rover have various mountain to island level calculations, for splitting clouds, carving canyons, and generating earthquakes respectively. This would be the conservative estimate to their power, and the one I feel is kind of impossible to argue against because it's blatantly displayed on screen. However, if you want to take the higher end for their scaling, you can actually get the high-tier S-class heroes and high-tier cadres to around continental to multi-continental, due to scaling not too far below Monster Garo, who could damage Sage Centipede, whose grand drill attack and general movements through sheer size alone have been calculated at multi-continental to small planet level. His carapace can withstand his charges, as he obviously doesn't grind himself into dust when moving, and therefore his durability should be relative to his attack potency for the most part. The version of Garo that is able to damage him is much stronger than any of the cadres and most of the S-class, but not by thousands of times. Nothing really implies a gap that massive to be in play, and therefore in my eyes you can feasibly argue that the upper cadres and S-class are indeed continental to multi-continental, with top tiers like Psychos and Platinum S reaching moon level. As for speed, I've gone over this many times, but light speed is pretty common within the series. Early series Genos dodges lasers that specifically have been said to have the properties of light. Awakened Cockroach claims he can dodge lightspeed attacks with precognition and gets blitzed by casual suppressed Orochi. Atomic Samurai casually slices lasers. Flashy Flash has multiple statements and calculations for being faster than light, so on and so forth. Even on the lower end, they should bare minimum be lightning timers at the very least, if for whatever reason the lightspeed stuff isn't your fancy. Moving on to Izuku Midoriya, he's a character that gets unjustly memed on a lot, but honestly he is kind of cracked when it comes to how powerful he really is. We'll be taking Deku as he was right before the final war arc, and at this point, based off numerous statements and implications, he should be comparable to Prime All Might, if not potentially even greater. So anything All Might has displayed, Deku should be able to match or even perhaps outperform. But what does that give us? At the very beginning of the story, All Might punches so hard he brings in a storm from across the horizon, which is a feat often calculated to large mountain level via moving all those clouds, and on a very similar level to the upper tier cadre's destructive showings, funny enough. This is basically what Goketsu did, but on a much higher scale, although a lot slower, which balances the showings to be around a similar tier of power. However, then we take into account that this All Might is nowhere near his prime, and even in this sub-prime state he is further nerfed here, because his time limit for the day is already up. Prime All Might would be much higher than this, and Deku is comparable to him, placing him at or even above the level of the upper tier cadres in terms of sheer power if you take the conservative estimate for them. However, we can actually get Deku a lot higher, as his final punch in the story generates a shockwave that alters the weather halfway across the globe for a week, which is a feat usually calculated to be strong enough to destroy multiple continents. Again, pretty similar to the level of the high-tier cadres and the S-class heroes using their higher-end estimations. As for speed, once again, you can lowball and highball. On the lower end, weakened All Might can completely blitz Bakugo's explosions while weighted and suppressed to, at the very least, less than 20% of his power, as that is the usual level he suppresses himself to when moving to not generate massive shockwaves. Using this, you can get his speed to a few percentages of light speed. But on the higher end, in her battle against Shigaraki, Star and Stripe is capable of reacting to lasers, which actually have been shown to have the properties of light. She can also dodge Shigaraki's radio waves, which also move at nearly the speed of light. Star and Stripe is self-admittedly weaker than All Might, and by extension Deku. Disregarding more meme-ish metas like Aoyama's naval laser, the top-tier heroes and villains in MHA have pretty decent arguments for having relativistic combat and reaction speeds, or even a few times higher for the absolute top tiers. For those who will use the infamous Mach 10 statement for All Might, I would like to first say that travel speed and combat speed are entirely different. Please look up the difference on YouTube and I'm sure you'll find plenty of explanation videos. Second, I love how a lot of scalers will say feats over statements and use that logic to disregard any statement that amps the characters beyond their feats, but then the moment a statement that would nerf them comes about, they immediately take it over the feats the characters have displayed. Just, chef's kiss. And third, One Punch Man is no stranger to strange statements. If you think All Might traveling at Mach 10 is bad, just look at Watchdog Man traveling at a pathetic subsonic speed and being treated as fast. I could go on about this Mach 10 thing, but that isn't the point of the video, so I'm just gonna move on now. As you can see, Deku is surprisingly very capable of holding his own and standing alongside with heroes like Darkshine, Bang, and Flashy Flash, and he has all his other quirks to provide him a lot of versatility. And on top of all of that, Izuku is also very smart and heroic. So, with the groundwork laid, what would happen if Izuku Midoriya entered the world of One Punch Man?
The opening scenario takes place immediately after the Vigilante Deku arc, and shortly before the events of the final war. Deku is patrolling the city when suddenly, a mysterious dark cube falls from the sky like a meteor, and Deku rushes over to investigate. Upon touching the cube, he suddenly finds himself back in the Vestige Realm, only this time, he's confronted by a mysterious looming presence. The monster god of One Punch Man. Deku obviously would never take the deal. He knows a Faustian bargain when he sees one, and he knows not to take it. And in retribution, the monster god has him isekai'd to the One Punch Man universe. Now, Deku would obviously want to get back home as soon as possible, especially if this whole scenario happens right before the events of the final war. But until he figures out how to return home, he'll no doubt want to make the very most of his time in this other world.
Upon being transported, Deku would immediately notice something is up. And when Izuku eventually sees his first monster, he would definitely know that this is not his world. He may think all this is the work of an enemy quirk user, maybe an illusion, but he would pretty quickly figure out that that isn't the case, and that this seems to be an alternate reality of some kind. Regardless, his world or not, the moment some monster attacks an area close to him, Deku would go confront it and save any nearby people. Basically, he would be a vigilante, similar to what Genos was at the start of the series. And similarly to Genos, eventually the Hero Association would likely notice this new guy running around and defeating monsters pretty casually for the most part, as threat level Dragon is pretty rare and anything below that Deku should be able to handle comfortably while he tries to figure out what's going on. As such, we imagine the Hero Association would take an interest in Deku the same way they did with Genos and reach out to him, offering to employ him as a full-time hero. Deku, having nothing better to do since he has no clue how to even begin to try to get home, would probably agree, and upon completing some physical tests, quickly be assigned the rank of S-Class, probably somewhere at the bottom like Genos initially was. From here, he would climb the ranks extremely fast, possibly in record time, as hero rank doesn't depend only on power but also on effectiveness, how active the hero generally is, how popular they are, and so on. This is why someone like Flashy Flash is so low. He doesn't advertise himself or really try to be that popular. Deku, on the other hand, would excel in pretty much every single one of these categories, being extremely heroic, active every single day, extremely effective, and another huge advantage at Deku's disposal is his professional hero training. Unlike in One Punch Man, heroes in MHA are trained to mitigate collateral damage during their battles, and how to search and rescue most efficiently, and so on. With all of his quirks giving Izuku tons of versatility and his general attitude towards being a hero, as well as a strategic mind, within months Izuku would 100% reach top 5 S-Class, no doubt. Again, not a strength ranking, just in general hero ranks he would be top 5 for sure, and in strength he would be one of the higher ones too. But speaking of heroes and ranks and all that, let's see how Deku may interact with various heroes in One Punch Man. Firstly, the man himself, Saitama. The interaction between them would be fun to see.
Deku would end up taking over the place of King and giving his own pep talk to Saitama. He would give a similar criticism that King did and tell Saitama that instead of being the strongest hero, what he should be aiming for is to be the greatest hero. Saitama would probably have the same response. He would say, like, wouldn't that just make me even more bored? But then, unlike King, who never really challenged that question, like didn't answer him, Deku would, because, in case you forgot, Deku has this person in his life named All Might, who's basically the closest thing to Saitama back in the My Hero universe, and All Might was never bored. So yeah, I think Deku would probably just tell a bunch of cool stories about All Might and, convince Saitama that just being a hero and doing the right thing will always be more satisfying than just looking for a good fight. I think Deku would probably get that message across a lot better than King did.
Genos is also someone who would be interesting for Deku to meet. On the surface, they're both young, heroic, and determined individuals, but while Genos is certainly willing to sacrifice himself for others, his motivation also has roots in revenge, and he can even be a little dark sometimes. So Izuku may be a positive influence and mellow him out a bit over time. And in return, Genos would be an excellent guide for Deku into this world if they meet early on. And depending on how early they meet, they could maybe even be partners, both essentially being rookies among the S-Class.
Another really cool thing to think about is how much stronger Deku might end up becoming. The One Punch Man universe is chock full of crazy superhuman martial arts that would make Deku insanely cracked if he were to master them. If he ever runs into Silver Fang, I think he would jump at the chance to learn the Fist of Flowing Water Crushing Rock. If Deku ever does learn the Fist of Flowing Water Crushing Rock, or the Fist of Whirling Wind Slashing Steel, or the Exploding Heart Release Fist, or any of these crazy superhuman martial arts, he's just gonna be that much more powerful. He's gonna be insanely cracked.
Yup, and this is something that could realistically actually happen. Deku has always been eager to learn from veteran heroes, and Bang is actively seeking out new and capable disciples with potential after Garo drove his old students away. He tried to recruit Saitama and Genos into the dojo. He would have absolutely no qualms accepting Deku. Heck, he may even approach Izuku with the offer himself. One major thing Deku would inevitably find out at some point is that the Hero Association in One Punch Man is a lot more corrupt than the MHA one when it comes to what can be classified as a hero. You have escaped convicts, assassins, and a room full of kind of arrogant jerks, honestly. In this atmosphere, Midoriya would likely feel isolated and foreign, which is why some notable friendships Deku may end up forming would be with Tanked Up Master and Metal Bat. Among the S-Class, these two are the most similar to Deku in their heroic spirit, and Izuku would likely be drawn to them as they'd be more akin to the heroes he's used to seeing back in his own world. It also helps that him and Metal Bat are almost the same age, so they could hit it off and maybe become pals. Perhaps. At some point, a My Mask may also see Deku in the way he saw Saitama and try to make him an idol hero, which would probably be kinda humbling to Deku, but also kinda weird.
And obviously Deku just has to interact with Moomin Rider at some point, because Moomin Rider is pretty much exactly what Deku would have become if he had never inherited One For All, either that or a police officer. Obviously, the two of them would be very good friends, and Deku might even use his Class S hero status to, pull some strings and get Moomin Rider his license back so he can ride a motorcycle again, because that was a whole thing. He used to ride a motorcycle, but then he got a bunch of speeding tickets, and he changed his name to Moomin Rider, which means rider without a license. Anyway, it's just a fun idea I had where maybe Moomin Rider gets like a super powerful motorcycle and becomes like a Class S hero. Now that he has like this god tier motorcycle that's like super maxed out, that would be really fun.
Yup, and in general, Moomin Rider and Deku would definitely get along well, and Izuku may even opt to help Moomin Rider out with training and stuff. And as said already, Deku would definitely see a reflection of himself in Moomin Rider, that never got so lucky as to have All Might notice him. It would definitely give Midoriya something to reflect on. Darkshine would be another interesting person for Izuku to talk to, especially after the raid when Darkshine got his spirit shattered. A hero with no heart, no determination to sacrifice himself for others would certainly be the opposite of Izuku, and Deku would probably try to help him out in some way, but it would also go to show him just how little true heroism there is in this world. However, he would still eventually discover one more heroic hero. Child Emperor may pique Deku's interest some. He would definitely raise an eyebrow at how someone so young could work as a professional hero, but very quickly Izuku would realize that underestimating him is a mistake and swiftly apologize if he ever doubted Child Emperor's abilities. He's smart and heroic just like Deku, willing to put himself on the line and risk his life for others, and Deku would respect that a lot. Child Emperor would be another person Midoriya would feel he can talk to and actually relate to, and they may become friends too. Perhaps Izuku would even request some new support equipment from Child Emperor at some point. And then we have Tatsumaki. First of all, both her and Izuku have green hair. Just wanted you to know that. But in all seriousness, the two of them would be some of the most effective heroes around, and over time Deku would likely prove himself worthy of just a sliver of Tatsumaki's respect. He's nowhere near as strong as her obviously, but Deku would be among the higher echelon of S-Class in strength, and definitely among the top when it comes to how active he is, how seriously he takes hero work, and how many monsters he beats daily, all of which are things Tatsumaki values. On the other hand, Deku would have great respect and maybe even slight fear of Tatsumaki. However, where things get more interesting is that the two of them have completely opposite ideologies. Tatsumaki refuses to be saved or aided, ever. Meanwhile, Deku is all about saving others and has himself been saved many times. He'd likely see through Tatsumaki's trauma just a bit and maybe, just maybe, attempt to help her sort her mental problems out. And that would likely get him thrown into a wall the first few times, but as he consistently tries to help, Tatsumaki may, emphasis on may, this is a very slim possibility, but she may hear him out eventually. And if he explains that he used to be weak back in the day and only got this strong because of the help he's received in his life, similarly to what Saitama told her, Tatsumaki just maybe could be moved a bit. Deku wouldn't have the benefit of being stronger than Tatsumaki the same way Saitama did, but he'd still be one of the, if not the best hero around. And Tatsumaki, again, would have some respect for him because of that. So there is a chance she would listen.
When Garo finally shows up and starts hunting heroes, obviously Deku is going to make it his mission to try and stop him. For obvious reasons, Garo would initially remind him of Stain, but unlike Stain, Garo never actually kills any of the heroes. He very easily could, but he never does. He never crosses that line. Deku's obviously going to notice that and be confused by it. And unlike all the heroes in One Punch Man who fight Garo, Deku's actually going to try and talk to him first. None of the heroes in One Punch Man ever really bothered to ask Garo what his beef was. They just kind of wrote him off as a lunatic, which he honestly kind of is. I mean, he still brutally assaults heroes with little to no provocation, and he even put Moomin Rider in the hospital. Now that right there, I don't think Garo gets nearly enough flack for that in the fan base. That said, however, Garo is still way more redeemable than a bunch of other villains that Deku's fought, like Stain, and Muscular, and Overhaul, and of course Shigaraki and All For One. The latter of whom is just straight up Saturday morning cartoon levels of pure evil. Considering how Deku wanted to save Shigaraki even after everything he had done, yeah, no duh, he's gonna try to talk no Jitsu Garo. and I honestly can't see a version of this where he fails to do so. Garo's very set in his ways, but again, he's way more redeemable than several of the villains that Deku's fought, and like I said, none of the heroes in One Punch Man ever bothered to ask him why he's out hunting heroes in the first place. Deku absolutely would ask him, and seriously, if Deku had been there during the Monster Association War, things probably never would have escalated to Cosmic Fear Garo. Things probably would have ended a lot more like how they did in the pre-redraw version, with Deku and Garo just talking to each other in that shack and stuff. I honestly think that's how it would most likely go down. I know a lot of people didn't like the pre-redraw end of that fight, including one in Murata, that's why they redrew it, but still. If Deku was the one, I feel like that's how that would have ended. Another reason I think Deku would be able to talk no Jutsu Garo is because the two of them have a very similar starting point. They were both bullied as a kid and told that they couldn't ever be heroes, albeit for different reasons and in different contexts. But while Deku never gave up on his dream and had always admired heroes, because he still had tons and tons of positive examples of them in his life, Garo never really had any positive exposure to heroes, and he just kind of accepted and embraced the whole monster label he was given. But if there was anyone who could reach him, if there was anyone who could actually reach Garo and actually change his worldview regarding heroes, it's Deku, without question. Honestly, Deku would just be such a positive influence on the world of One Punch Man, just in general.
Indeed. And another point worth mentioning is that Deku may view Garo as a dark reflection of All Might. Hear me out. All Might was the ultimate symbol of peace, an undying force that held the world on his shoulders and united people through hope. What does Garo want? He wants to be the ultimate symbol of fear, the absolute evil standing at the top and uniting the world through fear. Deku would notice this parallel, and I think it would be very interesting for him to compare the two ideals and the flaws between them. Garo would also abhor the idea of All Might if he knew of his existence. He would definitely criticize him for making other heroes complacent. And honestly, Deku and Garo just debating on All Might would be hilarious to see, and also thought-provoking. Straight up they just sit down and have a debate on whether All Might was good or bad for the society as a whole. Overall, Garo is unlikely to change his ways. However, if there is anyone who could get him to do so, it is Deku. Whether he would succeed or not is debatable, but there is a chance for sure. In general, placing Izuku into One Punch Man is like placing Goku or Luffy or Naruto into the series. He's just that type of person who would have a positive impact on a lot of people. Moving on, I would like to briefly go through the story of One Punch Man and how Deku being present may change it. And trust me, there are some pretty interesting changes that can happen here. Season 1, though, would remain mostly the same. Deku is probably not going to be involved much, since most events happen surrounding Saitama, who just ends every threat without issue. When the meteor falls, if he's anywhere nearby, he would certainly come to help. If worst comes to worst, he may jump up and smash the meteor with all his might Saitama style, and he may actually be able to shatter it in a similar manner to Saitama going by his final punch. That is kind of debatable because the meteor has pretty insane lore implications within One Punch Man. It does not seem like a normal meteor. But regardless, nothing really changes there, and Deku would later appear in the S-Class meeting, and consequently Boros' invasion. In all likelihood, Deku would just assist in the fight on the ground, but it is also equally as likely that he might try to float up to the ship, since he actually could, and the threat on the ground is already being handled by 4 S-Class. He could actually reach the ship, and Deku vs. Gloribas might be a fun fight, but Izuku better pray that it's Saitama who finds Boros first instead of him, because as strong as Deku is, he is not coming out of that room alive. He is built, but he is not built like that. Where the fun starts is Season 2. In the initial monster outbreak, Deku would definitely be going around defeating as many monsters as he can. But a really interesting scenario would be if he happened to be hanging out with Genos at the time of the attack. If this happens, he and Genos would probably split up to cover more monsters, but when Goketsu attacks Genos, Deku should be near enough to come to his aid. Now, since Genos was basically one shot into oblivion, Deku couldn't really save him from getting wrecked, but he could confront Goketsu one-on-one after the fact before the giant makes his way to the tournament grounds. And this fight would be pretty epic. Deku and Goketsu have pretty similar stats and both have advantages and disadvantages over each other. Deku has better fight IQ as well as numerous abilities that add a ton of versatility to his fighting style. However, Goketsu has a big reach advantage, 4 eyes to help him track Deku better, and of course he is a master martial artist and should have an edge in close quarters. Goketsu is one of the closest matchups for Deku when it comes to One Punch Man characters in my opinion, and the fight could go either way. Also, a fun interaction would be them clashing with massive shockwaves since they both utilize that sort of attack. Just a funny thought. But in the end, I do think Izuku would pull out the victory with high difficulty. He just has a much more varied skill set, with Fajin and Gear Shift being heavy hitters, Danger Sense helping him to predict and dodge attacks, Black Whip, Float, as well as Smokescreen all being good utility powers, and his intelligence would also definitely help out a lot. So even though they have similar stats, I do think Deku has an advantage when it comes to his skill set, and should win with high difficulty. I do think the battle may leave Deku hospitalized for a few days, but he should be good to go for the raid, and he would be a part of the main assault team going down into the dungeons. From here, it is honestly a game of luck. Deku should be very capable of taking down the low and middle tier cadres, so I'll be focusing on the more interesting ones. For Homeless Emperor, Deku most likely could knock him out via a finger flick shockwave or just outmaneuvering him and landing one hit. Remember, this is the underground. Homeless doesn't have the insane scale that he later would have on the surface. At the same time though, since the fight is taking place in a narrow corridor, it would be very easy for him to line up Deku for attacks and sort of make him tank through them instead of just dodging them. Unless Deku just smashes through the walls, which also would be something that he would definitely be more than capable of doing. Izuku might actually even accidentally kill Homeless Emperor since he does have human level durability, and if that happens, I imagine that would be quite a shock to the young hero. Evil Natural Water in its starting stages is not that threatening to someone of Deku's caliber. He could blow it apart like Darkshine did to at least stall it for a while. Overgrown Rover would be very challenging to damage and would be a fight as close as Goketsu in all likelihood, with Rover's blasts being hard to avoid due to their scale. I don't see Deku retreating in this situation either, as by now he would know that he's one of the Earth's strongest heroes, and probably be wary of leaving Rover to roam free and risk the Hound running into some of the weaker Strike Team members. At the same time though, he may try to lure it towards somebody like Tatsumaki, as he would be able to see her location on his communicator, or just heading towards some of the strongest heroes like Flash or Darkshine to double team Rover alongside him. This is assuming he cannot pacify Rover by himself, which is also a possibility. However it pans out, I do think Deku, either by himself or with help, should be able to at least force Rover into a stalemate and hurt it just enough for the Hound to back down. But it would cost him a lot of stamina and damage. Black S would be a very interesting fight. If Deku acts really fast and blows all of the Black S bodies away, he may be able to finish the monster before he can multiply to an insane extent, but if not, the fight would drag and eventually Golden S may come out. I do think Izuku has what it takes to fight and defeat Golden, but if Platinum comes out, it is definitely wraps for the hero. Hellfire and Gale would be interesting, but they have it out for Flashy Flash specifically, so I don't think that matchup would really ever happen. Psychos would be trouble as well, and Orochi is an instant loss for Deku. He could maybe stall him a bit, but that is the absolute best he could do against the Monster King. Overall though, if Izuku doesn't run into these two and doesn't force out Platinum S, he should be fine for the most part, and probably take out one of the lower or middle tier cadres before Tatsumaki pulls the entire hideout to the surface. Which brings us to the surface battle. Deku being present, as well as one of the weaker cadres likely being killed in advance by Deku, would definitely lead to the heroes having a much easier time overall. Vomited Fear Ugly may never happen depending on what cadre Deku faces in the underground, but assuming Gums and Ugly are both present and mess up Tank Top Master the way they did, Deku might go on a rage-fueled rampage at seeing one of the heroes he would probably be closest with getting this kind of harm brought down upon him. Ugly, Gums, and the others are not humans who can still be saved like the villains in MHA, and this would likely be the point where Deku gets that 100% and goes ham on them, destroying them even harder than Bang did. Since while his AP should be similar to Silver Fang's, the scale of Deku's attacks is much greater, and would likely blow both of these two to pieces in a badass scene. So no vomited if you're ugly. Deku would also definitely help immensely when it comes to holding down the ground against Black S, but since Darkshine and the Swordsman have that front covered, I imagine Izuku would instead single out Homeless Emperor and try to eliminate him due to how big of a threat he is. Bang may also be present for the main battle depending on how much Garo was impacted by Deku in this timeline. Assuming that he hasn't monsterized like in the original, Black S and Evil Natural Water would be pretty much all that's left on the monster side to go up against the heroes, and they would be up against Darkshine, Bang, Atomic Samurai, and Deku all by themselves, as well as all the swordsmen and other heroes, and Metal Bat too, and they would get absolutely cooked unless Platinum S comes out. But the transformation actually takes a bit of time, and Black S himself seeked out a moment when everyone was distracted to fuse into Golden, and Platinum takes even longer to form. In that time, Deku and all the other heroes wouldn't just sit idly by, and they would probably destroy the monster while it's incomplete. Either that, or they just keep facing endless swarms of Black S, with Deku blasting tens of thousands of them into oblivion with shockwaves, until eventually Saitama and Flashy Flash are teleported to the surface, and there is simply no way Black S can win. On the other hand, assuming Monster Garo does still happen, the situation becomes more intense as Bang is pulled away to fight him, and in all the confusion, Golden S at least should be formed. Since Vomited Ugly and Homeless Emperor are in closed casket coffins at this point, Golden S, with support from Evil Natural Water and tons of Black S, faces Deku, Darkshine, Atomic Samurai, and all the swordsmen, and likely Metal Bat too. I personally am of the opinion that Goketsu is superior to Golden S, so I do believe Deku could beat Golden S with high difficulty while the others keep Black S at bay, but if Platinum S is ever born, and definitely when Garo wakes up and arrives to battle, the story would most likely line up with the original. By that time, Deku would be extremely fatigued from all his battles throughout the day, and possibly from not having fully recovered from the recent Goketsu battle as well, so in all likelihood, Garo, Flashy Flash, and Platinum S, if he is present, would duke it out, and events would mostly align with the original One Punch Man. Again, assuming Garo retains his role as a monster and has not been affected by Deku or encountered him before or during the raid.
Actually, there is one way for Deku to still be extremely helpful even at this point in the surface battle. If the three-way constellation battle between Garo, Flashy Flash, and Platinum S goes down like in the manga and Flashy Flash gets knocked out of the fight first, well, if Deku is still there, he may not have the ability to directly win the constellation battle, but he does have the tools to help Flashy Flash make a huge comeback. Hear me out. So, Flashy Flash gets knocked out of the fight, Deku would rush over and he would use Black Whip to reinforce Flashy Flash's bones and bandage him up, because we know he can do that for himself. We've seen Deku reinforce his bones and bandage himself up using Black Whip. He can even puppeteer himself kind of with it when he could barely move anymore. I see no reason why he couldn't extend that to another person. He could bandage Flashy Flash up and reinforce his bones with Black Whip. And then Deku would use Gear Shift on Flashy Flash, and that would just be a massive, massive speed boost. I don't know for sure if Flashy Flash would be able to just casually blitz both of them off rip. It probably won't be that big of a speed boost. It really depends on how far you think the Gear Shift ability goes versus how much of a gap you think there is between Flashy Flash and the other two at this point. But it would be a massive assist. It would help Flashy Flash get back in the fight and maybe even win. It's kind of up in the air, but that is an option for Deku to help and assist in the final stretch of the arc.
Sleeping Monster Garo versus Full Power Deku would also be an extremely interesting battle. I think that one is just as close as the Goketsu one, if not even closer due to Garo's rapid adaptation. I do think if Deku went into the battle fully bloodthirsty and intending to just straight up kill Garo, he would have a solid shot at doing so from the beginning. But if the battle drags on, and if Deku doesn't want to kill Garo, I do see Garo coming out on top of that eventually. So all in all, Deku would do quite well for himself in One Punch Man, and definitely make the Monster Association raid a lot easier on the hero side. But the story does not end here, and there is still one major character interaction that would likely happen at some point after the raid arc.
Okay, so one of my favorite ideas for this whole scenario is how I believe an encounter between Deku and King might go down. At some point, Deku would find out King's secret, most likely in a way similar to how Saitama found out, and he promises to keep a secret for him. Then a few weeks passed, and one day, King is just walking down the street after buying a brand new video game or comic book or whatever, and then all of a sudden, a giant monster attacks, and it's a high dragon level threat. King is spotted by someone in the crowd, and now they're all cheering him on. But of course King is totally frozen in fear, and of course the King engine is pounding louder and louder, but because the monster is a high dragon level threat, the power of the King engine isn't enough to scare it. The monster grabs a little boy from the crowd and threatens to squish his head like a grape unless King shows off his true power. King wants to run away like an absolute coward, just like he ran away from G4, but in that moment, he sees the look in the little boy's eyes begging to be saved, and in that moment, for the first time in his life, King runs towards the danger. At this point in the story, King is so tired of being a fraud and so ashamed of his own cowardice that he charges at the monster knowing that he was powerless to do anything and was going to die. But for just once before he dies, he wants to at least try to be the hero that everyone believes him to be. And then, right when he's about to throw a powerless punch at the monster Moomin Rider style, Deku super speeds over, smashes the monster, rescues the little boy, puts him in King's arms, and then super speeds away, all in a fraction of a millisecond. And then, of course, everybody believes that King was the one who saved the day. But that's not even the best part. The best part is what happens afterwards. King finally manages to get away from the cheering crowd, and the sun is setting, and he's on his way home, and he runs into Deku again. King asks him why he didn't just save the kid and take the credit for himself, or better yet, let King die and then save the kid and take the credit for himself. Because at this point, King is just so guilt-ridden, he practically has a death wish. Deku thinks for a moment, and then he responds to him. He says, "Back there, when I saw you running headfirst into danger, you reminded me of someone I used to know. There are stories about every hero, of how they became great. Most have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they ever had a chance to think, almost on their own. And earlier today, that's what happened to you." And then that super wholesome and iconic music starts playing, King falls to his knees and crying, and Deku tells King, "You too can become a hero." And it would just be this extremely cathartic full circle moment, and then he takes King out to a beach and starts having him moving trash. I don't think Deku would actually give him one for all, but I had this other really cool fanfic idea. What if Deku were to awaken all 7 of his quirk factors plus the quirk transference ability, and this way he can selectively give away one of his quirks but still keep the other 6. So, Deku takes King to a beach and starts training him up with some rocky music playing in the background, obviously. And then, 10 months later, Deku pulls out a strand of his hair and he says, "Eat this!" And so, King inherits the Fajin quirk, after having already been awakened by Deku. So, the kinetic energy boost is now 1,000 times more potent, and even better, the Fajin quirk is powered, it's charged up by repeated movement. What is the one organ in the human body that is always passively repeating the same movement over and over and over again without ever tiring? The heart. That's right. King is going to be able to passively charge up the Fajin quirk via his heartbeat via the King engine. And that is going to be insanely broken. He is going to supercharge the Fajin quirk with his heartbeat, with the King engine. And then, just to top it all off, he's also going to learn the exploding heart release fist, which would also be supercharged by the King engine and the awakened Fajin quirk that's passively charged up by his heartbeat. And these 3 overlapping powers will create a positive feedback loop, and then King will actually, physically be as powerful as everyone thinks he is. In addition to his god-tier meta luck, plot armor, and ability to summon Deus Ex Machina.
At long long last, my thirst for battle can be satiated. Long have I waited for such a worthy challenge. I will savor this.
Finally, worthy opponent, our battle will be legendary.